Greetings and welcome to a Meatsmith Harvest podcast. It is great to have you here. This is the podcast wherein we strive to the best of our abilities as orphans afloat in a modern world, saturated with technology we don't understand, and adopt unthinkingly, myself being the most guilty of such a thing. In that context, trying nonetheless to revive and repeat the traditions of our fathers, and to hopefully thereby enrich the family table. I always find it befuddling and, well, actually kind of hilarious when in the meat processing world, which is my world, I find that there's a heavy reliance upon data, upon the test kitchen, upon the chefs in lab coats in the sterilized environment and the petri dishes. It is from that context where we get a lot of our rules about food preparation, about how to ferment and preserve foods especially. And those studies are usually conducted in response to some really horrible mishaps on the industrial scale, always, never on the domestic scale. They do a study, and then they observe a thing under a microscope. They cultivate the Clostridium botulinum bacteria, and then they figure out how it produces the botulate toxin, which is real bad. We don't want that one. And then they theorize. They make a poetic leap, a jump. They make a metaphysical assumption as hard materialist scientists, and they think about all the things wherein the anaerobic production of that toxin could possibly be produced. And then they make rules for the rest of us based upon that very isolated, anachronistic, sterilized experiment. And we'll talk about how to make salami at some point without all of the chemicals and tricky things. My reason for bringing this up now is more philosophical, because any real scientific project that we have in the modern era suffers from an elemental philosophical blindness. Primarily the idea that philosophy does not exist because it's too immaterial and metaphysical. And when you do that, you don't rid yourself of superstition. You just make some really grave basic errors. One of them is that you begin to analyze things, all the data, diligently compiling all the data, all the bacteria, the fungi, the molds, and all the temperatures and all the climates and all the environments. But you neglect the one bit of data that is visible from space, and that is tradition. So what people have done, that's the one piece of information that is not allowed in the clinical examination. You don't see that under the microscope. For that one, you need the lens of piety. You have to receive it in all due humility. You have to receive it from your ancestors. And we don't like to transmit that anymore, and we are also impious such that we don't really receive it anymore. We assume that everyone was dying on a regular basis, that there was an uninterrupted flow of bodies, of people throughout the past because they just wouldn't stop eating salami. Salami cured without nitrites and starter cultures. But this is utterly absurd. And that's why I take so much consolation and certainty from what came before, from how people did things, from tradition. Not least of all because on a purely rational basis, they have the empirical data. They did it, and they got results. But that's one data that is not allowed in the clinic. And therefore, in resolute, I hope, piety, we like to hear on this podcast what the ancestors did and how they artfully husbanded the land, farm, the creatures that sustained their lives, and with whom they were locked in a body, the body of the farm, the corporal reality of the family farm, which composed, a network of a village. How they partnered to live artfully and gracefully as possible, given the necessity and the weakness of the human frame, which really inspires the greatest creativity, not least of which is the curing of ham, which is just winter survival rations that once you cure ham, you realize sustains the body but also the soul because it tastes extraordinarily well. Survival is actually quite delicious when you reprise the traditions of our fathers. So that's what we are into. That's what I constantly go back to for my guidance in how to husband our resources and how to preserve things. It's the delicious way, and it's the proven way, the democracy of the dead, as Chesterton might say. So I'm constantly looking back at how to adapt in our modern context such that we can thrive. We can enrich the family table and really do the most elemental thing well, which is to sustain the body, that pressing momentary need. And that is actually what farming is. In fact, more than that, that is what manual labor is. So I wanted to read you something and talk about why we would farm. Why would we grow food at all? It's kind of a crazy thing to do in the modern age, when the easy option is just down the road, right? Where you have to make an extraordinary move and extricate yourself with much striving from the convenience, the tyranny of convenience, whereby everything is to be had for legal tender through trade and commerce rather than manual labor, rather than the fruitfulness of your own husbandry and the production of your own small patch of earth. Why would we do this? I remember when I first got started in engaging with agriculture and producing our own food, it was definitely motivated by nutrition, because it is not even debatable now that our entire food system is corrupted from the top to the bottom. Yes, you can try to get organic. You can try to get that grass-fed meat. You will pay a premium for it, which I understand. But even that stuff pales in comparison to the quality of the fare that you can produce. It's not even on the same plane, because ultimately, all of the advanced labeling of organic, non-GMO, natural, does more to obscure the provenance of that food than to convey it. It is undeniable. And the reason is it's mass produced and mass distributed. That's the problem. The bottleneck of slaughter, the bottleneck of butchery and mass distribution means we do not know at all. We know nothing about the production of our food. I don't care how many fancy pants labels it gets on there. The only way I would say that you can know that the food is actually nourishing and actually good for you and your children is if you produce it yourself. And outside of that, if you are in this thing called a relationship with the producer, wherein friendship and mutual trust that is implied in friendship actually exists. Outside of that, though, the project of centralized and match production serves primarily, I think, to control the population. But that's not what I was going to talk about. I wanted to read to you a really cool paragraph on the purpose of manual labor. Because this is how I try to think about it. When I try to reverse a little bit and see how our ancestors did it, I want to see why did they farm? And the obvious answer to that question is because they had to. They did not have the octopus of the railroad and now, the highway system for the transportation of centrally grown and processed food. They didn't have that. So necessity definitely drove them from time immemorial to at least produce some of their food or to acquire it from their friends and family, from your neighbors, to sustain the body. And so I can't stop wondering at the immense difference between a pre-industrial, pre-centralized agriculture mindset and the one that we have now. They inhabited a completely different universe. And so even the most elemental, basic things that they would have thought, or not even thought, subconsciously assumed, to me, are utterly earth-shattering. They reveal to you, to me at least, the nature of the universe, the nature of the terrestrial plane and how things work. So what is the end of manual labor? Why do we do it today? I know that the medieval peasant, for example, wasn't thinking, I really have a nasty, allergy to the A1 beta casein, ergo I need to acquire an A2 cow and buy it from the store. They have completely different motives. Another motive that they did not have, that I have, is enthusiasm. I don't know if you can relate to this. But when we are walking around, muddling around in the modern world, and all of its gray blandness and its brutalist architecture and its dehumanizing spaces and processes, the mere appearance of something that is artfully made or low tech, like a good axe, is positively poetic and absolutely captivates me. It's so beautiful, and its beauty is inextricably linked to its use. It's what I think Longinus would have called the sublime. And I'm just talking about an axe. Longinus was talking about Greek architecture, where he makes this beautiful, I don't think it's a point, an interpretation, it's discovery of reality, which is you build a temple, a Greek temple, for example, in a certain way with columns that follow a certain dimension and proportion relative to the tympanum and the foundation and the distribution of the columns and their girth, because that's what makes it stand forever, like they're still standing right now, a lot of them. So it serves this undeniable structural end. But at the same time, the more you pursue single-mindedly and with good craftsmanship the perfect structural proportion and rules, the more beautiful the structure becomes. They are one and the same. If you were to pursue beauty, for example, and merely proportion and symmetry solely for the purpose of being pleasing to the eye, for the aesthetics, you would also stumble upon and receive structurality. And when those two things meet, something has then been well made. It is sublime, according to Longinus. That is the sublime. And, I think a well-made axe is sublime. You got the fawn's foot of the handle with that graceful arc, which also happens to fit the human hand perfectly and enables you to swing it with the perfect dexterity. And then you have the bit, the blade, the steel itself on the end. And when it's roughly forged and made of a high carbon steel, it becomes something upon which you inscribe all of your work. Does that make sense? I feel the same way about carbon steel knives. The narrative of your omnivory, the oil from your hand shines the handle. The blade itself takes on patinas and stains that come from its use. Beautiful coloration. And it makes it beautiful because, not in spite of, its use. They are the same thing. Its utility and its beauty, its form and its function. That is sublime. But you know what? Plastic. We're going to use plastic. And we're going to paint everything some bizarre neon color. Or that's why I think, like a Fisker's axe, for example, is it's not as functional as a well-made wood-handled axe. In fact, I have one leaning on the wall behind me there, the Grants Forest Brooks forest axe. Unbelievably beautiful axe. A Fisker's axe, which is composite, made of plastique, except for the bit, which is made of some blunt, artless, hot-dipped steel of some kind, painted, of course. Of course they paint it. It is not just not as sharp and functional as my beautiful handmade axe, but it is also a kind of unbecoming ugly. It is something like sacrilege, but not really. I can't quite go there, but it really feels like that. And that is what I get when I look back at the traditions of our fathers and the way things that used to be done. Sublime. So St. Thomas talks about the ends of manual labor. And you're not going to believe this, but manual labor, according to St. Thomas, it has four ends, four purposes, I could say. And purpose number one is very interesting. The other purposes are, you could probably think of them if you gave yourself a minute. That's like everything that St. Thomas says, right? He's building off of Aristotle. This stuff is as obvious to a person educated in Aristotle as it is to a 7-year-old that is still in a state of innocence. I feel like he can come up with these reasons pretty well. So the three of the reasons are it is a remedy to idleness, manual labor. It is a way to curb concupiscence, so excessive desire. You get out there and you sweat and you work for the thing. You can't just punch in a code and get it to excess. You got to work for it. So it curbs concupiscence and it furnishes abundance. Manual labor always does, for the sake of almsgiving. So you've got, limiting or removing idleness entirely, curbing concupiscence, and for almsgiving, for charity, for giving to others, the abundance of the work of your hands. But the first purpose is not intuitive, and it's more simple than I would have thought, left to my own resources. And that is that manual labor is directed first to food production, to agriculture. So listen to this beautiful paragraph. This is not from St. Thomas. This is from The Importance of the Rural Life by one Father Speltz, who was a priest of the Diocese of Winona somewhere in the 1940s. And this is I think this is his thesis project. It's called The Importance of the Rural Life According to the Philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas didn't have to argue for the rural life explicitly because life was rural in a sense. It was agricultural. And so this is his way of drawing out these principles from St. Thomas that St. Thomas did not have to explicitly argue for because it was the water in which he swam. So he says, scholastic philosophy gives first place in manual labor to that primary form of production, which is agriculture. St. Thomas assigned a higher place to agriculture than to industry and commerce. End quote. I think even Aristotle said that you should not allow your soldiers. I got this from Dr. Richard Malosh. He gave a great talk on this once. If you have an army and you're training soldiers for your polis, they should not be permitted to engage in trade or commerce because it will make them effeminate. It will make them weak. Manual labor, on the other hand, curbs that concupiscence. Okay, resuming the quote here. He says, evaluated on the basis of the four ends assigned by St. Thomas to manual labor, agriculture merits a high place. Manual labor, the work of the hands. The hands are the organ of organs, according to St. Thomas. Okay, that's my interjection. Back to the quote. Manual labor is directed first and principally to obtain food. Secondly, to remove idleness. Thirdly, to curb concupiscence. And fourthly, to almsgiving. Husbandmen furnish themselves and others with the prime necessities of life. For this reason, their work has always been held in honor, and they themselves have the satisfaction of knowing that their work is not useless activity. Oh, that line gives me heartache. Okay, back to the quote. The farmer, whose land is entrusted to him for the good of all, is a steward of the world's goods. In working his land, he will more likely have a surplus, hold on. I would say a superfluidity, but that's too many syllables. A superfluity of goods. So an excess, an overabundance with which to give alms. Then will the wage earner, whose salary is always adjusted to the prevailing economy and leaves little margin for charity. And then he goes on to talk about how agriculture engages the whole man, which will be my second point. So, manual labor is directed first and principally to obtain food. And St. Thomas even says that manual labor in that category even can be included the works of the intellect, teaching, writing, the works of the mind. Those are also manual labor. Isn't that interesting, according to St. Thomas? It is a precept, according to St. Paul, that if you do not work, you do not eat. All labor, as to its primary purpose, is ordered to the production of food, that elemental need. And in this work of agriculture, the entire person is called upon. All of your faculties, all of your powers. It is not a merely repetitive Fordist menial task, right? To consider a field and to plant it and to dance with the rhythm of the seasons and the fertility of your soil. It requires all of your rational powers, all of your highest intellectual abilities. This is not just hoeing a row and getting calluses on your hands. So it appeals to the whole person, which is part of why St. Thomas corrects Aristotle, who thought that agriculture, manual labor, was illiberal and irksome. It was illiberal and irksome and not worthy of the philosopher. But St. Thomas says, no, it provides the instruments, the basic elemental necessities of life, which are necessary to live virtuously. And it calls upon all the powers of the human person. It is therefore very worthy of philosophical analysis and consideration. And it is superior to trade and commerce because of those four reasons, but also because of the trade and commerce, especially in De Regno, in St. Thomas's letter to the Prince of Cyprus. They make life fat and easy, right? Whereas, I mean, could you imagine the distinction from this? You know, when we think of what are we going to have for dinner, we think first of what do I want to eat? And then we think, how can I go get it? Well, I just got to go buy it. Wham, bam, done. And then we cook it up. Maybe. Usually it's ready made. And then we feed ourselves. But it all begins with an unlimited concupiscible desire to eat. One that is not hemmed in by necessity or has basically no limitation. Now, concupiscible desires are not bad. They're oriented towards the good of the body, right? The sustenance of the flesh. Like we need to eat. We need fuel. This is a good until it becomes excessive, until it becomes unmoderated by reason. And trade and commerce create a context wherein it is so easy, almost, I would say, unknowingly, to slip into excess. There is something inherently excess about tomatoes in January from Argentina. How on earth does that happen? That is crazy. There is something excessive about that. Whereas when you are creating your own food, your first thought at dinner time is not, gee, what do I want to eat? And then poof, through commerce and trade, there it is. Your first thought is, what do we have? What is in the larder? That's what we're going to eat. Because that's what's fresh. That's what's available. That is what has been given by the farm. Totally different mindset. And so I think we are born into a context wherein food is to be obtained with such slippery ease that I think we're basically born addicts. I don't know how you extract yourself from this ease of food acquisition except by extraordinary artificial effort. And by artificial, I mean you have to conjure a conviction in spite of all your surroundings. You have to pretend. You have to manufacture a conviction that the grocery store does not exist for at least one, of your essential food items. And then act as if it doesn't in order to live the good life and to eat well. Isn't that bizarre? I feel like that's unprecedented. I don't know. Maybe it's not. One film that actually explores this in a very compelling and cinematic manner is The Village by M. Night Shyamalan. That's it. Yeah, Shyamalan. Wherein he really makes you, I think the value of that movie is to consider the value of retreating from the modern world and what you're willing to do in order to maintain that separation from the modern excesses and the tyranny of convenience and the slippery slope of pounding Doritos and the artless life of modernity. It's very interesting. And really, they wanted to do it to preserve their children from suffering, which is very interesting. It's a really good analysis of that. Anyway, so we work manually, we farm, we create food for curbing idleness, concupiscence, almsgiving, and we work basically to produce food. That is the point, even of the labor that we don't even think of as manual. If you're just using your brain, the primary purpose of that brain work is food acquisition, the bonum corporis, the goods of the body. We need them. So this side of the fall, I think it's very interesting to consider this as the reason they're bonum corporis, the reason they are the elemental goods and not the excessive goods, right? The goods of riches, which are extraneous, non-essential, superfluous. We don't actually need them. We need the most basic and present need that is right in front of us at each moment to sustain our carcasses. And these needs are few, right? You basically just need a sufficiency of bodily goods insofar as you need food, clothing, you need raiment, shelter, you need a house, and you need transportation because you got to get to Mass. Those are the elemental goods of the body. We need those. Those are the most pressing needs. Any goods outside of that are going to be extraneous, non-essential. They're not bad in and of themselves, but you don't need them. And the end of manual labor, the first end of manual labor is to acquire them. Now, our basic needs for those basic elemental goods is a result of defect, right? Think about this. We need them because we need them. Because we are naked, vulnerable, starving, cold, and stuck. We need them because we are in a post-lapsarian and we are here after the fall. We need them because we are weak. We need them to sustain us because we are weak. They are a constant pressing need. You need to eat, or eventually you will starve. We are very weak in that way. So that alone is good reason for manual labor, for the work of agriculture. But here's the crazy thing, okay? This kind of blows my mind. Think of before the fall. Adam did not need these things, right? He needed food, and God supplied that on the trees, right? It was just there. Here you go. He didn't need meat. And yet, he was still to tend the garden and to subdue all the creatures. Adam did not need the basic elemental goods of the body like we do. And yet, he was still charged with being a farmer, with doing agriculture, with husbanding the earth. Why? What? What is going on? He did not need them. I want to read you this cool answer from St. Thomas. This is in the Summa. And he answers, he addresses this directly head on. Why? Why would Adam need to do this? The objection to which this is the answer goes something like this. God gave man mastership over the animals, although before sin he had no need of them, for God foresaw that after sin, animals would become useful to man after sin, right? Therefore, at least before sin, it was unfitting for man to make use of his mastership, of his headship, of his stewardship, his husbandry of the animals. That last bit was my addition there. It was unfitting for Adam to assert mastership. That is the wrong opinion. And so St. Thomas is going to correct it, right? Adam did not need to do husbandry. It was unfitting for him. He really just gave Adam the animals in view of his eventual fall and the precipitous weakness of his body that would result from that. And then then the animal's purpose would be fulfilled. Their existence, his husbandry, would become necessary. But St. Thomas says, no, actually, no. Before the fall, it was necessary for Adam to subdue the earth, right? That command came before chapter 3 of Genesis. That was commanded of Adam in a state of innocence. He needed to be a husbandman, a farmer, to subdue the earth and all the creatures on it. And so St. Thomas answers, in the state of innocence, man would not have had any bodily need of animals, neither for clothing, since then they were naked and not ashamed, there being no inordinate motions of concupiscence, right? He didn't need, end quote, he didn't need wool. He didn't need wool sheep. He didn't need to get warm. He was good. No problem. Did not need wool sheep, didn't need to shear, didn't need to card and weave wool or clothing. And then taking up the quote again, nor food. He didn't need the animals for food, since they fed on the trees of paradise. And he also did not need animals to carry him about, his body being strong enough for that purpose, right? He didn't need, end quote, sort of. I'm interjecting a lot of my own words here, but not really. Not to destroy the sense. So he didn't need a horse. He didn't have to ride a horse to get from point A to point B, because he did not, in a state of innocence, experience excessive exhaustion. His body was not weak in that way. Here's why the innocent, fully equipped Adam, before the fall, needed to subdue the animals. Ready? But man needed animals in order to have experimental knowledge of their natures. This is signified by the fact that God led the animals to Adam that he might give them names expressive of their respective natures. Nomen est omen. He needed animals in order to have experimental knowledge of their natures. How useless was it, from a materialist perspective, of course, for Adam to name the creatures? Come on. That doesn't do anything or have anything to do with their use or their service to Adam. Why would he need to name them? How long must have that taken? That would have been quite a train of creatures for him to name individually in accord with their nature. But he had to do that because I think Adam had speculative knowledge of their natures in his state of innocence, but not experiential, or, as St. Thomas says, experimental knowledge of their natures. He needed to know them, not just abstractly. He needed to know their natures, their substantial forms, experientially. That is a deeper kind of knowledge, and most importantly, it is proper to a rational being. That was part of his domain. It was necessary for the executor of divine providence, which is Adam, the king of creation, to know experientially the natures of the animals. How delightful is it? Think about when you first start farming and you extract yourself from the bland, sterilized grayness of suburban life, and you get your first chicken flock or your first animals. There is something in your rational nature that delights, positively delights, when a creature expresses its nature, acts in accords with its nature, which it always does. It always does. They don't disobey their natures, unlike us. So why did Adam need to subdue the animals, even in a state of innocence, when he did not need them at all? It was so that he could know their natures, because their natures, their individual natures, were a product of the divine creator, and they express his intent. And so it was part of Adam's union with his king to be able to know about his creation. Because the nature of no animal or creature is superfluous or accidental, or dare I say, the random outflow of an unguided evolutionary process, which is a philosophical abomination. No, it was intentional. It expresses the natural order. The natures of beasts express divine intent, creative intent of the Creator. And it was therefore necessitated by Adam's role to know them, to be a farmer, to be a husbandman, even though he did not need their meat or their milk or their wool or their transportation services. Think about this when you think about what man is. He's a rational creature, right? The powers that we have that distinguishes us from pigs and horses and cows and sheep and all other sensible creatures are the intellect and the will. And the intellect is the seat of our reason. Now, especially after the fall, we have a great deficiency by our natures. Like I said, we are born pink, soft, and fragile, and weak. In fact, even our eating of meat after Noah's flood was a result of our weakness, our corporeal weakness, the change of the earth's surface and the hostility that it is to the human form, to our bodies, weakened us. And in order to survive and to live, we needed to eat meat. It's a product of our weakness. I'm not going to say anything about the obvious frailty of vegans and vegetarians, but there you go. It's because of our weakness that we need to eat meat, right? And then you read later in St. Thomas quotes Avicenna, who is this, this Oriental peripatetic, this Muslim Aristotelian, who says that it is unbecoming for man to eat food that is untreated by art, end quote, end approximate quote. That's almost a direct quote. It's really close. Unbecoming for man to eat food untreated by art. And he is saying this in a very particular context. And again, this goes back to our nature. And I'm trying to articulate why, outside of necessity, we would farm. And I think these reasons for farming, for husbandry, for food production, whatever you want to call it, they're not just rooted in averting idleness, concupiscence, almsgiving. There's something deeply rooted in our very being that inclines us to it in a way that fulfills our nature, the way we are. So in the context that Avicenna mentions this, it is unbecoming for man to eat food that is untreated by art. He's talking about the order of being, right? You think about the powers that we share with all living things. There's reproduction, there's nourishment, and there's growth. A rock doesn't have those things. But grass does. Pigs do, and so do we. We share in them. But then as you ascend the levels of being, you get more powers. You get more powers. Pigs can move in pursuit of their bodily goods. Grass, not so much. They don't have locomotion. Yeah, they can grow towards the sun, and they can send their roots out, but they're fixed in a place. Pigs can ambulate nobly. It's part of their nobility to be able to do that in the pursuit of their bodily goods. And then they have senses, which are these more refined powers that can help them to acquire their nutriment, their nourishment. And so they nourish themselves in a way that is superior to the way that grass does. And I would say it's superior because it is a closer imitation of what the top of the food chain does, if we're going to use that terrible phrase. The top of the order of being does. That's us on the terrestrial plane. We eat more, pigs eat more like us than grass nourishes itself. And that is part of the nobility of pigs and dogs, is how much more than the lower life forms they cooperate in the life of man, in the life of the rational animal. And when you get to this level of the sensible creatures, you find that they can be ranked by their nobility according to their participation in our life, which is why I maintain that domesticated livestock is actually the fulfillment of their animal nature, not the defilement or the impoverishment of their more primal wild form. No. A wolf is a degraded dog. If all creation was designed to be subdued by man originally, then the novelty, the new thing, is the rebellion of creation against man. The wolf is not primitive in the sense of being first or primal, right? The original version of the canine. And that's even debated because we actually have no history of that genetically. No. He's second. He is the creation. That wolf is the creation. The wild dog is the function of the fall, of the rebellion from the king of creation, who is man. Right? The fulfillment, actually, of the canine is not to live wild and free scavenging. No, it's to look up in the eyes of man and to learn parts of his language, which dogs do, which is incredible, right? Because language is the province exclusively of reason. And you can teach a border collie, come by and away to me, and it knows what to do. That's not a degradative wolf. That is a fulfillment of the canine's nature. And I would say that is actually primary, because that is a dog that is subject to man. It is under the subjugation, the dominion of a man. That's actually the original form of nature. That's how it ought to be. And so my noble Georgie cow, our milk cow, she's not a dilapidated, denuded, skinny slave of milk production that has descended from the noble liberty of the Bos aurochs, right? The wild European bovine. She's a return to her original dignity, the original dignity of the bovine, which is at the service of the family unit. It actually participates in the life of man intimately, which is a much higher level of being. The difference between a sensible being and a rational being is almost, but not quite, almost infinite. And to think that a cow can participate so intimately in that membership is that's an advancement of its nature. That's a fulfillment, not a degradation. And that was the prelapsarian original intent, the pre-fall intent for the noble bovine. And so Avicena, I'm trying to give you the context with many side roads, is saying that it is unbecoming for man to eat food untreated by art, because these sensible beasts, as noble as they are, especially when they participate in our life, they actually have equipment that we lack. They walk around with their primal bodily instruments for acquiring their bodily goods, if that makes sense. So they need warmth. Well, they don't have to build shelters. Some of them do artfully, which is again a nobility, accounted to them as nobility, but they generally walk around with their shelter on their back. You know, my dog Tuck, we just had an unbelievable Arctic frost blow through, and he's like panting outside. I can't believe it. His coat is so incredible. But he's walking around with his home on his back, his coat. And then he's equipped with teeth to butcher his food. He's equipped with claws and the skeletal muscle to chase it down. All immediately equipped with the instruments for supplying his bodily goods by nature. He doesn't have to reach outside of his own body to find the ability to get his bodily goods and to sustain himself. He was born that way, and he is ready to go to supply his bodily goods. We are not born that way at all. We are not born with thick coats that are double layered. We have to make them. We have to make our raiment and our clothing from the wool coats of other creatures. We are not equipped by nature with butcher knives in our head through canine teeth and molars that can crack bone and get to marrow. We are naked in pink and very susceptible. We are very weak. But Providence has willed instead to equip our nature with a different tool, and that is reason. We don't have those tools by nature, but we can create them. So it is not even on the table. It's not even on the table for us to do anything artlessly. If we reverse and define art as the exclusive product of reason, right? We're never gonna, I don't care how many elephants paint on a canvas. It's not art. It is not the product of reason. Reason is the genesis of art. A rational soul. And that is what we have. Not just to create beautiful, frescoes and winsome symphonies and heart-rending poetry, but to supply our most basic bodily goods, just to feed our carcasses, just to not freeze and lose limbs to frostbite. We use our artistic power, our reason, to do all of those things. It is therefore unbecoming for us to eat food untreated by art. Unbecoming doesn't just mean like improper. Well, it does mean that too. But it's deep word. It means it does not accord with our being. It is contrary to our nature to eat artlessly, to do anything artlessly. I can't think of a more apropos example of that outside of brutalist architecture, right? It's brutalist. It brutalizes your nature as a rational being to countenance it and to walk inside. It does violence to our nature. It is artless. It is part of our nature to acquire our most elemental bodily goods through the mediation of reason. This power that is exclusive to us and that is the way by which we acquire our most elemental bodily goods. And in the case of food, we don't chase it down, chasing, a bison until it's too exhausted to move, and then we seize upon it and consume it raw with a bunch of our pack members, right? That's not how we acquire our food. We do it artfully. We do it with art because it's in our nature. So instead of the fierce battle of tooth and claw, we use reason. And we artfully unknit a bison or a cow, a steer, with our tools designed by reason. We unknit it with regard to the way it was put together, with regard to its design. Because when you do that, that's the definition of efficiency. It does not waste effort. All of our effort is directed and pointed and ordered towards creating food that fits our culinary artistic designs, our pots and our pans and our oven. And so instead of chasing down the animal, what we do is farm. The product of reason in the acquisition of elemental bodily goods, especially of food, is called husbandry, the art of husbandry, the art of killing a pig nicely. Because that is outside of our need. This is what I'm trying to come back to, is I think that the command to steward creation, to have dominion, like domicile, like domestic, to house ourselves as, and to bind ourselves to the house as husbands, right? The art of husbandry, husband, which is, I don't actually speak Proto-German, but I'm sure, or Saxon, whatever that word is from. But it's to be bound to the house. And guess what? Our house is the earth. And it is in that sense that we have dominion over it as the head of the household, as humans. And so it is actually unbecoming, contrary to our being, to do things artlessly. And so why would we do manual labor when need, oddly, has been removed from us in the modern era, right? Like I said at the beginning, the easiest thing is to conjure what you want to eat and then go acquire it from the giant vending machine, which is the grocery store. Why would we, without the need to produce it ourselves, why would we engage in agriculture at all? I get it. And I would say it's because it is in our nature as rational beings. It is becoming. And when we do a thing that accords with our nature, we call that delight. That's pleasure. It establishes us in our nature. And I think, without equivocation, I can say that's why homemade bacon tastes so well. It's so delicious. Your home-reared pork is so good. It's one thing, relative to the production of the grocery store and the centralized meat packing industry. That is barely pork, and it is bland, insipid, waterlogged, chemical-logged, hormone-laced, horrific. And so, not surprisingly, unsavory, not delicious. So just being extricated from that abuse, your pork will taste better than anything it is possible to purchase. Not even a debate, not even close, right? But I think when we do something well, when we execute an action well, like killing a pig nicely or producing a beautiful meal, we get this added benefit, this icing on the cake, this supervening good that is called pleasure. It is delightful. It's not the end of the act of agriculture. We don't only produce our own pigs for the sake of the gallimaufry of prosciutto, for stuffing ourselves like gluttons with prosciutto. That is tempting because it is so delicious. No, pleasure can't be the end, but it definitely makes the act easier, and it establishes us in our nature. And of course, it must be moderated by temperance and reason. Otherwise, it actually loses its flavor, which is indebatable and evident anytime we overeat. And so I think that farming, agricultural production, is not just a good idea, given the modern context of and the corrupt nature of our food. It accords with our nature. It's what we are. It's what we do. It's what we did in our ancestors, Adam and Eve. even when they didn't need it. When they didn't need to do husbandry, they needed experiential knowledge of the natures of animals to better love and serve the creator of those natures. And we are gifted with reason. And so we do all things by nature artfully. This is why technology is not even an option for us. There's a sense in which we must. The product of reason it requires technology. We must have a tool because we don't have the immediate tooth and claw. We have to create tooth and claw in the form of benign and beautiful technology to help us harvest the basic elemental bodily goods, which is probably something I'll talk about next week. Been thinking a lot about technology. Just read for the Catholic Man Show, had a great discussion with them on the famous essay, Letters to Lake Como, by Letters from Lake Como by one Romano Guardini in 1924. It's very interesting, very perspicacious essay. And back in 1924, he said that the food that they were eating from top to bottom was corrupt in Italy, which is hard to fathom. But we'll probably talk about technology next time because that is an ever-present debate in my brain, nonstop. So thank you for joining the Meatsmith podcast. I hope this was something illuminating or food for thought, because we do need to feed the brain sometimes. But this is what I've been thinking about with reprising the traditions of our fathers and what it might have looked like to even think about food, to have experimental knowledge of its nature in a modern world where its nature is obfuscated and hidden from us by so many degrees of mass production and distribution. It's impossible. It's so difficult to even know it at all. Ergo, difficult to fulfill our nature and to be good husbandmen and huswives, which is the feminine parallel there. Husband, huswife, both bound to the hus, which I think means home or house in Anglo-Saxon or German or something like that. So we're going to be continuing to plumb the depths of our salutary and artful and hopefully propitious dominion upon the terrestrial orb, this goodly earth, in the family pig class, which is coming up in April 16th, 17th, and 18th. And we have recently restructured the class a little bit. So it's still going to be the 3 days. I've got 2 beautiful Berkshire pigs growing out in benevolent confinement right now, an organic feed. And we're going to harvest them over the course of 3 days. And again, this is a completely hands-on Meatsmith class, as we usually do. It's going to be 100% the students scalding, scraping, eviscerating, cutting, curing. I'll do a lot of the cooking, but you guys you'll do some cooking too. We'll make sausage, we'll make blood sausage, we'll make pate, we'll make all kinds of things, most especially, we will make bacon and ham. And that's in April, but it is now, for the first time, available in a la carte form. So you can purchase 1 day at a time. If you want to come to all 3 days, that is definitely the best value. But if your schedule does not permit you to leave it'd probably be 5 days, depending on where you're coming from, because the class itself is 3 days, so you got a couple days for travel. If it is difficult for you to leave for that long, you can sign up for just 1 day at a time. And you can find that on farmsteadmeatsmith.com. Click on the Family Pig 1 class, and you will see in the pull-down menu for purchase that there is an a la carte option where you can just purchase for a much reduced rate just 1 day or 2 days. If you just want to come to the butchery and the charcuterie, so the day where we do the cutting and the curing and the cooking, then maybe you would just come to day 2 and day 3. So that is out there. That is an option now. Because time is only becoming more precious, and it is so difficult to sacrifice all the other duties that we have to go learn how to artfully kill pigs. I totally get it. And so I hope that this makes it a little easier. So do check that out. Attend 1, 2, or 3 days of the Family Pig, April 16th, 17th, and 18th. Of course, we would love to have you. And also check out the Meatsmith membership. We have that on farmsteadmeatsmith.com. As always, it's an online membership with over 70 films that I've created over the years on the domestic human art that is anchored in our nature, even without our post-lapsarian weakness. All films pertaining to how we might harvest animals well and raise them, from the moving of pigs with electric fence to killing, cutting, curing geese, lamb, beef. It's all on there. And I'm continuing to add more. I'm actually editing the beef butchery video for the hindquarter right now. I've got the forequarter posted. Hindquarter is coming down the pike. So check that out at farmsteadmeatsmith.com as well. I'll also be at the Okie Homesteading Expo coming up and the Ozarks Homesteading Expo. So we will be there again together to really explore how we might enrich the family table, augmented and encouraged with the benign encouragement of our ancestors, just by doing the things the way they did them, which is much more artful and enjoyable and, of course, delicious. So until then, thank you, everyone, for hanging out for this here podcast. I'll see you again. We'll do this again, actually, in a week. Until then, bye-bye.